We are studying Sri Aurobindo's commentary on the Kena Upanishad, and so far we have read the first chapter and have begun the second. The text of the Kena itself begins with this question: Kena, by whom? The first verse opens the whole theme dramatically by asking questions which are seemingly very simple and yet which lead to directly to the goal that the Upanishad is going to take us to. By whom missioned falls the mind shot to its mark? By whom yoked moves the first life breath forward on its paths? By whom impelled is this word that men speak? What God set eye and ear to their workings? And all of these questions are pointing to something behind, something greater, which is the impeller of the mind, impeller of the life breath, impeller of the speech and sight and hearing. In the subsequent verses of the first part, the Kena goes on to say, that which is hearing of our hearing, mind of our mind, speech of our speech, that too is life of our life breath and sight of our sight. The wise are released beyond and they pass from this world and become immortal. So the question is being answered. By whom missioned falls the mind shot to its mark? By that which is mind of our mind. What leads the sight? That which is the sight of our sight, and so on. And when we attain to that, we are released from our mortality. And then it describes that further in the third verse. There sight travels not, nor speech, nor mind. We know it not, nor can distinguish how one should teach of it, for it is other than the known. It is there above the unknown. It is so we have heard from men of old who declared that to our understanding. And then it goes on to define it, but in the very act of defining it, it leads us to it by a kind of an introspective, subjective process. In the fourth verse, it says, that which is unexpressed by the word, that by which the word is expressed, know that to be the Brahman, and not this which men follow after here. The next verse, that which thinks not by the mind, that by which the mind is thought, know that to be the Brahman, and not this which men follow after here. And similarly, it speaks for the eye and the ear. That which sees not with the eye, that by which one sees the eyes seeing. Know that to be the Brahman, and not this which men follow after here. Similarly, with the ear, that by which the ear's hearing is heard, that is Brahman. And finally, in the eighth verse, that by which the life breath is led forward in its path, that is Brahman. I'm not reading the full verse, it is the same pattern as the others. Each of these verses we will review later because there is a second and third meaning also implied, which Sri Aurobindo points to in the footnote in the translation. That which one thinks not with the mind, that is, the mind cannot think it. So the verse itself in Sanskrit is so worded, it says two things at the same time. That which thinks not by the mind, that by which mind is thought, that is Brahman. But at the same time it says, that which the mind cannot think of, That by which the mind is thought, that is Brahman. So there is a double play, double meaning, both of which are very useful for our introspective process. For the moment, though, we will just take this much. And then we see the second part of the Upanishad, which elaborates further on the nature of Brahman. The third part then starts with a small parable, a story. The gods have become victorious, they have become arrogant of their greatness, and then that eternal puts a challenge before them. And one by one, the gods come forward, first Agni, then Vayu, then Indra, and each of them fails, fails the challenge. And then they all go to Uma and ask her, what is this thing which is so simple looking and yet which we cannot overcome? And then there is another discussion on the eternal. Now, I'm quickly giving this summary so that we can step back and look at the larger picture that Sri Aurobindo presents. A question started, an introspection started, an elaboration of the Brahman, and then this sudden story with all the gods. What is this whole thing about? And Sri Aurobindo explains that this Upanishad is primarily concerned with the relationship between the subtle reality, the mind consciousness, and Brahman consciousness. It does not concentrate too much with the material reality. And the domain of mind consciousness is the domain of the gods. And in discussing the relationship between the gods and the Brahman, the psychological consciousness and the self, it also by implication carries with it the reality of the material world through these correspondences, through the symbols used. And Sri Aurobindo elaborates this grand picture of the Upanishadic viewpoint. Once we have this big picture in our mind, as we read the verses, the whole thing makes enormous sense. There is a logic, there is a continuity, there is a symbolism, there are many layers which resonate across each other. So, in our earlier three discussions, we then also looked at the first few paragraphs of the second chapter of Sri Aurobindo's commentary, where Sri Aurobindo explains that here mind is the principal agent of this phenomenal experience. All of our experience of the world is taking place by mind and in mind. But the mind still has to relate to this material world through certain devices, and the principal instrument of the mind's consciousness is the life force in the nervous system. So the mind embedded in the brain wields the life energy which flows through to the five senses, and through the senses contacts the physical world as it is, and reports back through the life force back to mind of what this world is like. Mind experiences this contact in itself. My finger touches, there is a return of the information through the life energy, and in the mind there is registration of heat. Did the finger feel the heat? Did the life energy flowing through the nerves feel the heat? In fact, my arm might be cold and the life energy passing through the nerves might be passing through a low temperature. It is in mind that the heat sensation takes place. If we discussed that also last time, if there is the injection of an anesthetic, I would not feel anymore. The finger itself would not register the heat. I would only see a blister form. My mind would not know. So the real experience of heat is taking place in the mind. In fact, all experience of the world is taking place in mind, by mind, using its principal instrument of life force through which it reaches out to the senses. Sri Aurobindo then describes the whole worldview now in further detail. Why this is important? Because it is by understanding these that the deeper connections and resonances of the main text of the Kena is suddenly becoming clear. Sri Aurobindo explains that the Upanishad begins by the query, by whom? Because it is looking for the final source or control of the activities of the mind, life force, speech, and senses. The question is Kena, by whom or what? And then he goes on to describe the ancient perspective, conception of the universe as being of three gradations. The lowest gradation of the material universe is formed by the five elemental states of matter, bhuta, elements. Therefore, adhibhuta is the domain of the material, consisting of, formed of elements. But in this material universe, there are non-material powers manifesting through the mind force and life force that work upon matter. And these are called gods or devas. And everything that has to do with the working of the non-material in us is called adhi-daiva, that which pertains to the gods, daiva, deities, gods. Deva itself meaning light, illumination, so beings of light, consciousness illumined, powers of illumined consciousness, these are the gods. And everything in the mind and life force in us belongs to that domain through which they act through the five senses in the gross physical domain, which the Upanishad is not concerned with. But still, it is interesting that we discussed this last time. The five elements correspond to the five senses. Behind each of these, also, there is a presiding deity and operation in the cosmic domain of the gods. So, when we are given this description, and after that we move back to the domain of the gods, there is a link going down all the way into the material, and the material world itself is seen to be a gross, limited, distorted reflection of a higher reality. Even though this Upanishad does not directly deal with this reality of the gross material world, because it deals with the principal powers operating in matter, whose actions are reflected in the gross material world, there is as if the reality of the material world revealed as it discusses the higher reality also. So there is the adhi-daiva, the non-material powers, but above the non-material powers containing them, greater than they, is the self or spirit, Atman. And everything that has to do with this highest existence in us is called the spiritual, Adhyatma, Adhi-Atma. For the purpose of the Upanishads, the Adhidaiva is the subtle in us. It is that which is represented by mind and life, as opposed to gross matter. For in mind and life, we have the characteristic action of the gods. The Upanishad is not concerned with the elemental, the Adhibhuta. It is concerned with the relation between the subtle existence and the spiritual, the Adhidaiva and the Adhyatma. But the mind, the life, the speech, the senses are governed by cosmic powers, by gods, by Indra, Vayu, Agni. Are these subtle powers the beginning of existence, the true movers of mind and life? Or is there some superior unifying force, one in itself, behind them all? So this is the question which is being raised through the first verse. By whom or what is the mind missioned and sent on its errand, so that it falls on its object like an arrow, shot by a skillful archer at its predetermined mark, like a messenger, an envoy sent by his master to a fixed place for a fixed object? What is it within us or without us that sends forth the mind on its errand? What guides it to its object? And all this is where we had paused. We had discussed these and the deeper sense behind each of these. We discussed also the way the mind functions through life force and through the senses. We discussed what we spoke of as spiritual biology. And with all that now, we are going to the heart of this question. And Sri Aurobindo is going to take us to this heart, but showing us all the intermediate links and connections, which will give the full picture. Most important is the power by which the mind itself acts, and that is the life force, prana. And the question could be asked, is it prana that is leading the mind? Is it the life force impulse in us which directs the mind to its goal and carries it to its goal? And this is where the nature of life force and its working is being discussed. This is the paragraph now which we begin. Then there is the life force, the prana that works in our vital being and nervous system. The Upanishad speaks of it as the first or supreme breath. Elsewhere in the sacred writings, it is spoken of as the chief breath or the breath of the mouth, mukhya asanya. It is that which carries in it the word, the creative expression. So we see here equally a prominence of the life energy. Mind and life force are the two daivic powers in us, freely operating, forming our psychological domain of experience, which then plugs into and works through the physical body consciousness to connect to the material world. But these are the two principal powers of our psychological experience. In the way the Upanishad gives importance to breath, there's an interesting parallel you will see when he uses this phrase, chief breath, first breath, supreme breath. This role of life force is so great that it is even seen as the nodus of the wheel by which everything is moved, as described in the Gita. In the Islamic tradition, the word, the name of God, Allah, is itself, in one of the translations, meant to mean the breath, the supreme breath, Allah. And so there is this idea of the ultimate reality itself being the breath, which breathes life. In the biblical tradition, similarly, God breathes life to give life. It is through the breath that the life is transmitted. The whole universe is moved by the life force that flows through it. And so, just as we could have asked, is mind the true power behind? We can ask now, is life force the true power which leads everything, including mind? So now Sri Aurobindo describes the working of life energy in the domain of the body first, because that's where we experience it most directly. Before that, he also mentioned it is that which carries in it the word, the creative expression. So even speech and the powers of expression really lead back finally to life breath. And now in the body of man, there are said to be 5 workings of the life force called the 5 pranas. Later, Sri Aurobindo will say none of these are the first or supreme breath. But we must understand what they are because they are operations of the supreme breath. One, specially termed prana, moves in the upper part of the body and is preeminently the breath of life because it brings the universal life force into the physical system and gives it there to be distributed. So we'll look at all 5 later. We'll just read this passage first. A second is the lower part of the trunk, termed apana, is the breath of death, for it gives away the vital force out of the body. A third, the samana, regulates the interchange between these two forces at their meeting place, equalizes them, and is the most important agent in maintaining the equilibrium of the life forces and their functions. A fourth, the Vyana, pervasive, distributes the vital energies throughout the body. A fifth, the Udana, moves upward from the body to the crown of the head and is a regular channel of communication between the physical life and the greater life of the spirit. None of these are the first or supreme breath, although the prana most nearly represents it. The breath to which so much importance is given in the Upanishads is the pure life force itself. First, because all the others are secondary to it, born from it, and only exist as its special functions. It is imaged in the Veda as the horse. Its various energies are the forces that draw the chariots of the gods. The Vedic image is recalled by the choice of the terms employed in the Upanishad: yukta, yoked. Praiti goes forward as a horse driven by the charioteer advances in its path. And then the next para discusses who has yoked the life force. But in this description of the life force, we are given a very deep insight into the working of life energy in us. Sri Aurobindo bothers to elaborate on this because there is a deeper meaning to these functions, a deeper symbol in the way the five life breaths function in us. And at the same time, through each of these five life breaths, there is a connection tracing us back to a higher reality. So the first of these, which Sri Aurobindo says, the most near representation of the supreme breath is the prana, which draws universal life force into the physical system and gives it there to be distributed. And it is in this range, entering in the nose, mouth, down to the midpoint of the abdomen, where there is the solar plexus or the uh, barrier which bridges the upper half and the lower half of the torso. In this whole region, biologically, principally, it is the lungs which seem to hold this life breath. But in the subtle body, it is not only the lungs but this whole region into which the air is taken. So when we practice pranayama, literally translated as breath control, prana control. Prana is not just physical breath, but life energy breath control. We breathe in and we feel this chest expanding, but the subjective experience is not just lungs expanding, we feel the entire chest filled with energy, even glowing out beyond the physical boundaries of the chest. We can even, as we breathe in, breathe the life force into the head, neck, chest, or direct it into other parts of the body. So the subjective experience in the subtle body of the prana is the taking in of this life force, holding and then distributing. And this is the first and most important function of life energy in the body. It is by this that we are taking in life force into us. The human body draws from the universe through this operation. It's life energy. This is the reason why you will see when a person is struggling to survive, he's trying to grasp, breathe in more air, and trying to retain it. He's not able to retain, he must blow it out, but he quickly breathes in again and tries to hold it. The second function of the life force, though, is as if countering this first. In the lower part of the trunk is the breath of death, for it gives away the vital force out of the body. You will see all the functions of throwing out are taking place in the lower region of the abdomen through excretion, through urination, and also in the act of procreation where the life force is thrown out. But everywhere there is a throwing out movement below. The food taken also comes in through the mouth, passes through this upper half, gets digested, and then the material is thrown out. The waste of the body is gathered through the blood, gathered into the intestinal regions, through various other organs, thrown out from there. So, in the subtle experience, it is here that we have the experience of releasing and throwing out something. You notice, for example, in the excretory and urinary functions, the muscle, the sphincter is always tightly closed. You have to consciously release and push to throw out something. And this function is governed by the apana. If you observe carefully the way the biology works, you cannot swallow and excrete at the same time. You cannot release urine and swallow food, drink water at the same time. The two are as if contrary to each other in their working. If you do one, automatically the other is blocked. If you release below, automatically the upper is blocked. And there seems to be a natural, instinctive correction between these two. When you observe a person seated, he's tired, he's exhausted, you'll see him slumped, the lower part of the body stretched out, the legs stretched out, stomach bent, and you'll see the energy is all flowing down. Whereas a person who is preparing for action in life, you will see as if the energy pulled up from below, brought into the higher part of the chest as if expanded and ready for action to push forward. The posture of the body reflects the balance of energy between the prana and the apana. Automatically, instinctively, we adjust the posture to correct for the actual action that we are about to perform in life. It goes both ways. The posture influences the balance of energy modifies the posture. So, what is it that balances these two? And there is a third function of life energy, samana. So, the word itself, equalizing, balancing, regulates the interchange of these two forces at their meeting place, equalizes them, and is the most important agent in maintaining the equilibrium of the vital forces and their functions. So, right here, where we have at the base of the sternum, where there is the, I forget the term now, the diaphragm, which separates the upper half and the lower half, is the focal point of the functioning of the samana. So physically, the position of the diaphragm is reflective of this balancing between the upper and lower half. But there is actually a push of energy there, which decides how much to transmit from the upper to the lower. It regulates how much of what is taken is held and how much is thrown out. So if the samana is not operational properly, then you may take in a lot of energy, but it leaks out as quickly as you take in, and then you don't have energy. On the other hand, if more is thrown out, even though you may not be taking in, if less is thrown out, even though you may not be taking in much, you'll find there is a lot of energy, but not too much activity. So there is a very important regulation taking place there, and regulates the interchange between the two. Now, the two are considered extremely important in the yoga practice because the state of meditation, the state of concentration in which the consciousness is liberated from the physical body identification, is linked to the functioning of these three breaths, and even the other two we will see shortly. In the Bhagavad Gita, you're taught that you have to equalize prana and apana. You have to turn up the apana vayu, and then the life force is taken upwards, and the mind consciousness is liberated. So there's a very important connection between these things and the state of consciousness in which we live. The turning up of the apana is considered to be extremely important. This practice can be attained through various methods. The easiest, simplest, spontaneous way of doing it is to channel our energies into creative activity. The moment we have to channel energy into creative action, you'll find automatically the body posture shifts, the energies from below are pulled up, and the chest expands, the mind widens, brightens, and the energies are expressed out from above. Other methods involve specific forms of breathing exercises, postures through pranayam, mula bandha, and others by which the sphincters of the anus are pulled up and tightened, and the energy pulled up consciously. And this is meant to increase the life energy, vitality, and retention of vitality in the body, and is part of certain pranayama breathing exercises. But you will notice in the meditation, even without bothering with any of these energy flows, even without being conscious of them, in the very act of concentrating awareness on a single point, whether in the chest, in the head, or above, you will find all the prana, apana, and samana vayus regulate themselves, arrange themselves, and the energy is turned up. You will find it very difficult to concentrate or to meditate when the apana vayu is strongly turned down. The turning upwards seems to take place automatically. On the other hand, after the meditation is complete, you will notice the energies are turned up. If you enter into an activity where the energy is turned down, there is a very quick diminution and dilution of the gathered tapas. So this is important for us to understand because of these ramifications. Of course, for the health, these things play an important role also. And then comes the fourth vayu, fourth airflow. The vyana, pervasive, distributes the vital energies throughout the body. Now, in the way the biology works, when the air, and specifically oxygen, is taken into the lungs, the blood flow takes all the air, absorbs the oxygen, and then spreads out into the whole body. We might say, well, that's the function of Vyana. Yes, but indirectly. In the subtle body, though, without reliance on the blood, there is a spreading out of life force all through. The air taken in, or rather the life force taken in, centered here, spreads from here, from the chest region, into all parts of the body and their functioning. And it is through this spreading out of Vyana that our awareness spreads into the limbs. And so we'll again observe how this functions during intense concentration or meditation. When all the energies are drawn towards the focus of the meditation or concentration, you will notice our physical senses tend to get diminished. We don't feel the cold so much, we don't feel the heat so much. Discomforts are not so obviously registered. The body is as if numb to them. And this is because this Vyana has been also pulled back along with the other energies. When you emerge out of deep concentration and you recover your body consciousness, there's a tendency for people to suddenly get restless. Oh, my leg is numb, my body is stiff, and they start agitating. And after a while, the sensation returns and you're all well. And so we think that we need to stamp our feet and move our body to return sensation. That's not true. You can stay exactly the same without a single movement and just allow the awareness to gradually spread. And that is the movement of the Vyana. You will feel your awareness gradually extending through the limbs, recovering, and it's as if the blood flow rushes back. But actually, in the biology, there is no change at all. It's the same amount of blood flow which was going through. It is not the blood flow, it is this awareness, and the carrier of the awareness in the body is the Vyana spreading, and as it returns, the parts of the body automatically become warm, and the senses begin to function more and more. Sensation returns to the fingertips, and so on. So the Vyana is what distributes vital energies throughout the body, but it also then carries with it the consciousness. Each of these vayus you will see is a carrier of consciousness, of different aspects of the consciousness. And finally, the fifth, the Udana, moves upward from the body to the crown of the head and is a regular channel of communication between the physical life and the greater life of the spirit. So in the yogic texts, they often give the starting point of the rising udana here in the center, where the diaphragm is centered on the sternum, and from here it rises like a line or a column, a passage, all the way to the top of the head and mediates between these two. Now, in the way Sri Aurobindo describes it, it is the part of life force which rises from the gross vibration to the subtle vibration, linking the two. So the higher life, greater life of the spirit and the physical life are distinguished not by location but by quality of consciousness. After all, spirit is everywhere equally. But this breath is mediating between two gradations of consciousness. From the material to the spiritual, it rises and, of course, brings back through the same passage the influence of the spiritual into the material. So the fifth udana is what shifts the whole consciousness up or brings down the higher consciousness into the lower. When, for example, in certain kinds of meditation, we take the physical consciousness and turn it upwards, opening it to the spiritual consciousness, invoking the mother's force, opening ourselves to her force, allowing ourselves to be lifted into her consciousness. It is this operation of life force which lifts the consciousness up. And then the whole body feels as if it has become light, almost as if weightless, as if the inertia is gone, it is free. It is becoming of the nature of the spirit. Taken to its limit, it can actually cause in the physical body the loss of inertia to the point of feeling so light that the body seems to be able to float. And is one of the mechanisms by which the body can be made to be free of even the gravitational pull. You will find in the Yoga Sutras there is the utilization of this breath for liberating the body from its heaviness. But the primary liberation of heaviness is the liberation of the inertia of the body and the ascent to the spirit. Its secondary effect is liberation from gravitational effects, and so the body can be lifted up very easily. The mother made this observation when she first chose Kumudben as a teenager. She was barely 16, I believe, when the mother chose her to be her personal attendant. And she told her first rule, she said, do not bother with anything that other people may say. Because there was a lot of gossip, a lot of politics around, and this is the first advice she gave. And so she said, do not bother about it and do not involve yourself in it. Fine. Then she took her around, showed her things in her room, and then suddenly she turned to Kumudben and said, if I fall, will you be able to lift me? And Kumudben was surprised. She didn't know what to reply. And then the mother said, I can make myself light as a feather or heavy as a stone. And of course, she didn't need a reply from Kumudben. The point being that she had the ability to instantly increase or reduce the effect of gravity on the body. And it didn't need any special kind of a pranayam training and mastery through asanas. What the Hatha Yogi accomplishes through the asanas and pranayam can be more directly accomplished by direct mastery of the life breath and the spiritual force that then infuses the life breath and dynamizes it. So she could simply just lift herself from that inertia of gravitation and make herself light or heavy as necessary. And it is through this operation of the udana that the action on the physical consciousness is made. So my intention in spending time on this description is to point out to you the reason why Sri Aurobindo has spent time on it. Because these things have subtle implications, spiritual implications, which he does not obviously elaborate on here. But once we've understood this, we will see how higher operations of life force in their own free domain have their corresponding operations in the lower parts of the physical consciousness, in the adhibhautik domain. And although the Upanishad itself does not bother too much with the adhibhautik, this link helps us to understand the full connection from the adhyatmic, highest spiritual, to adhidaivik, the domain of the gods, down to the adhibhautik, the domain of the five elements, matter. So, having understood these five functions, we see how important life force is in everything. But still, he says, none of these are the first or supreme breath, although prana most nearly represents it. Why? Because prana is the first of these. Unless the life force is drawn from outside into us, none of the other functions could operate. It is that which gives life. Seen from a different perspective, what allows in the totality of the oneness of the cosmos, what allows a unit of individuality to form? A special inflow of the universal energy, taking the form of individuality, as if seeming to separate itself from the rest by the flow. When you enter the ocean, where am I in the ocean? It doesn't matter, because everywhere is ocean. Until a special flow of current forms a little whirlpool. Now I am here. I am separate from ocean which is outside me. So we as individuals are formed out of this prana inflow which outlines, delineates our separateness, forms our individuality, and gives this separate sense of existence. Of course, at the same time, it also cuts out the ego identity. And that's why the knot of the ego, Sri Aurobindo observes in the synthesis of yoga, the knot of the ego is in the life force. It is there that the instinct of separateness is seated. So, the most powerful of the experience of supreme breath for us as individuals is this prana, because it is what creates us. It is the formator of our individuality and our separateness. It is most nearly represents it, the supreme breath. But that breath to which the Upanishads give importance is life force itself. It is imaged in the Veda as the horse. Its various energies are the forces that draw the chariots of the gods. So we will find in the symbols, for example, the sun, Surya, has 7 horses which pull his chariot. And they represent 7 powers, 7 forces, 7 energies of the sun. Of course, we can interpret these in many ways, on many levels. In the modern understanding, they will say, this was a scientific understanding of 7 colors. But there are no 7 colors. There are an infinity of colors in between all these. We call them 7 colors because each of these represents one of these forces. That's why we give it those 7 a special importance. It's the forces which come first. So the symbol is obvious. Life force is what pushes, drives, and so Ashva, you will recall the sense of the word which brings into creation, which becomes, and so force that creates, manifests. It is imaged as a horse. And this image of the horse is called on by just the use of this word in the verse in Sanskrit, just the suggestion thrown by use of this term yukta and praiti. By whom yoked moves the life force forward in its path. So moving forward is praiti, the pushing forward of the horse, and the yoking, linking, binding of the life force. All of these suggestions bring in the image of the chariot of the gods. So Sri Aurobindo now continues. Who then has yoked this life force to the many workings of existence? Or by what power superior to itself does it move forward in its paths? For it is not primal, self existent, or its own agent. We are conscious of a power behind which guides, drives, controls, uses it. So even when we experience life force pushing, life force driving, the power to drive was given to it by something. Even when in us there is the push of the instinct, we can become conscious that there's something behind the instinct which triggers the instinct itself, which guides it, drives it precisely, even controls it and uses it for something else. A goal which we ourselves are not conscious of when the instinct drives us. When a scorpion stings, the point of the sting goes directly to a nerve center. It does not sting casually in some cluster of fatty tissue. It stings where the nerve is. What in it knows exactly the point where it has to sting? When the bird weaves its nest, what in it knows that the nest is needed for it to lay an egg and to the protection of the child which will grow? And what in it knows that later the nest has to be dismantled? I had once observed just here in the garden on the branch of a little plant, a bird had made a nest, it had put its egg. Unfortunately, some cat came and shook the plant until the bird's child fell out and the cat ate it and went away. Soon after, somebody walking by pulled the nest and took it out. And I noticed how 2 weeks later, for a while, immediately after the bird came, made a lot of noise, it couldn't find its child, it went away. And we never saw the bird until 2 weeks later. And 2 weeks later, it came precisely at that location of the nest. A few strands of grass which were still tied, it began to pull it out. The instinct in it knew that the nest has to be dismantled, otherwise, it will become a focal point of attraction for all kinds of other creatures. They will know next time that you're going to put your child there. So, once the whole process is over and the little child is free and flying on its own, it must come and dismantle the nest. So, that instinct had kicked in after 2 weeks. It came precisely at that spot and removed the few strands which were remaining. If you think about the tremendous knowledge which is there behind the instinct, which drives the life force and pushes the creature to act. Even when you see the formation of the fetus from a single cell, as the cell multiplies and grows, it's just a bundle. There is no direction to it. Yet somehow something decides a direction and organizes all the organs, builds nerves, bones, muscle, etc., with precise knowledge driven by life energy. It is possible for the human being, the scientists do this all the time, to interfere with that spontaneous flow of life energy. And you modify its working and you create then some aberrations in the form. But the life energy itself knew exactly, left to itself would make it perfect. And if it discovers afterwards, for some reason, a defect has been created by some other intervention, it knows to shut down the body. And the defective birth does not last too long. The body winds up quickly. So there is a power behind which guides, drives, controls, uses even life force. We are conscious of a power behind, and this is, of course, our subjective experience. When we observe, introspect, we become conscious there is something else which acts through the life force. There's something else which impels the mind. The force of the vital breath enables us to bring up and speed outward from the body this speech, that we use to express, to throw out into a world of action and new creation the willings and thought forms of the mind. And all this requires the vital breath by which things are thrown out. See, when we speak of speech here, it's not only the air that is being pumped from the lungs as we speak, that is the most superficial part of it. It is the energy we put into the speech which has the effect. You can say very quietly to somebody who's not moving, somebody's inertia, and said, move. Or you can say, move. And what did you do? It was not the volume, it was the energy you put into the speech which threw and hit. And I think we've all had this experience at certain times that somebody speaks a word, the word hits you. And it was not the word spoken, it was the energy that the word carried, the energy in the word. And it is to this that reference is being made here, the vital breath, the force of the vital breath, of which the physical breath is only a reflected symbol. Of course, for the biology to make a sound, you have to have the physical air to push. But it is the vital breath which puts drive into the words. When a leader gives a command and suddenly we feel seized and carried by the command, it is this energy which he has thrown out through the speech. And it is this which creates, which moves the world into action and creates new things. And new creation, the willings and thought formations of the mind. All of these are thrown out by this vital breath. So you can see even mind is dependent on life force for manifestation. So this force, it is propelled by Vayu, the life breath. It is formed by Agni, the secret will force, and fiery shaping energy in the mind and body. But these are the agents. So he's speaking of two powers. Again, why it is important that Sri Aurobindo takes time for all this? He is describing to us the Vedic worldview. The modern worldview is very reductionist. It reduces things to biological and physical functions only. The Vedic worldview gave as much importance to the psychological powers and to the spiritual foundation behind as it gave to the biological physical functioning. And we have to look at all three gradations to be able to fully understand the nature of the text. Why it speaks of Agni and why it speaks of Vayu in the parable which follows later, where Agni and Vayu fail to act. Because he says precisely this, the life breath which gives the power of action is precisely propelled by Vayu. And now, if you look at all the functions in the universe where something is being brought into articulation, into expression, a new creation of thought form materialized, it is always this power of Vayu which is involved. And now broaden this picture to all functions and operations in the universe at all levels, from the atom through to the molecule, through to the single cell, to every object, to entire planetary systems, to galactic systems, and the whole universe, and all the working to bring forward into manifestation and give form, expression, drive, power of action is Vayu. And the totality of this power that acts is the god Vayu. And if Vayu fails to do something, that is enormously surprising. So that's why that parable now will become so meaningful once we've understood this. But there's another power. When you gave new form, it was propelled by Vayu, it is formed by Agni, the secret will force and fiery shaping energy in the mind and body. We touched upon both of these briefly last time when we spoke of the five elements, and the air principle is one of the operations of Vayu, and the fire principle is presided over by Agni, because it is that which through friction, through heat, creates the experience of light, illumination, sight, but also the experience of form. So Agni in the Veda is the one who creates form, who holds life force, guides it, and molds out of it form. So again, if we look at the example we took earlier, in the ocean, which is equal, there is no form, no separation, no location, everything is the same. But when there is a current now which whirls, that push of the current is the power of Vayu. But the whirl which forms the shape, the spiral, the whirlpool, and the center of it, the individuality and the form of it, is Agni, which sees a form and articulates to give form to the energy which drives. Both are needed. It is Vayu which propels, it is Agni which gives it form. It is fiery shaping energy. But the shaping energy also must drive, must direct. And so it is the secret will force which gives the shape, holds the shape, gives form. So in the atom, what holds the atomic structure together as a structure, as a form, is the Agni principle. What keeps the dynamism going is the Vayu principle. The whirl is the dynamism, the form, and the relationship which gives it the meaning, the quality, the result, the property is Agni. But these are the agents. Who or what is the secret power that is behind them? The master of the word that men speak, its real former and the origin of that which expresses itself. So when the word was spoken, when the power was put out to cast into form, there was something which expressed itself, the origin of that which expressed itself, of which the agents are Vayu and Agni. So again, as we saw Vayu as a cosmic being, presence, power, function, so we can see Agni as that which casts into form, appearance of form in everything you see, from the subatomic particle which has a form, through the atom, through the cell, through our human body form and the world form and the appearance of galaxies, everything which is cast into form out of a malleable, formless energy is the functioning of Agni. So you have this cosmic power of Agni which gives form to the universe. We have this cosmic power of Vayu which gives the energy and power, the impetus in the whole universe. And both of these cosmic deities failed to do something very simple, to blow a blade of grass or to burn a big blade of grass. And obviously, there was a shock. And then they turned to Indra. But the point being, the whole parable now acquires a different sense. You see now the continuity from the earlier discussion to this parable and the importance of these deities and how even they are unable to overcome that which impels them, that overrides them. There is something greater than them all which acts through them, the secret power behind. Now, Sri Aurobindo links these two to the lower functions of our senses. The ear hears the sound, the eye sees the form, but hearing and vision are particular operations of the life force in us, used by the mind in order to put itself into communication with the world in which the mental being dwells, and to interpret it in the forms of sense. The life force shapes them, the mind uses them, but something other than life force and mind enables them to shape and to use their objects and their instruments. What God sets eye and ear to their workings? So here again, the eyes and the ears are taken first because these are our two primary senses, but also in continuation of what was discussed, the sight is presided over by the by Agni. and the sound, the hearing, the vibration is presided over by this power of Vayu. And so he is continuing now from that cosmic domain down to our subjective sensory material experiences. He says finally there's something else which gives to our experience this experience of sound and sight. What God set eye and ear to their workings? Not Surya, the god of light, not ether and his regions, for these are only conditions of vision and hearing. So the idea is you need a condition for sight and hearing to take place. But the perception itself, the hearing itself, stands outside the conditions. Meaning, let's say, for example, in order for rain to happen, there has to be a condition. There has to be a moisture. There has to be a drop in temperature. There has to be a certain arrangement of wind. And then you might or might not get rain. But if the condition does not exist, you won't get rain at all. But that does not change the fact that rain exists as a power, as a process, as a reality in the universe experience. So it is with this sight and hearing. They need these tools, devices, and means, powers. But these are only conditions of vision and hearing. And then he says, the gods combine, each bringing his contribution. The operations of the physical world that we observe as of the mental world that is our means of observation. Everywhere, in the mental and the physical. It is the gods who combine each bringing their operations. You remove one, you will not get the result. But still, they are only combining. But the whole universal action is one, not a sum of fortuitous atoms. It is one, arranged in its parts, combined in its multiple functionings, by virtue of a single conscient existence, which can never be construed or put together, akrita, and is forever anterior to all these workings. The gods work only by this power anterior to themselves, live only by its life, think only by its thought, act only for its purposes. We look into ourselves and all things and become aware of it there, an I, an is, a self, which is other, firmer, vaster than any separate or individual being. We will look at all these again next time, but with deeper appreciation, just completing the text. But since it is not anything that the mind can make its object or the senses throw into form or for the mind, what then is it? Somehow the mind can't see it, the senses can't see it. What is it? Or who? What absolute spirit? What one supreme and eternal Godhead? Ko Deva. So this is the first phrase of the first verse. Ko Deva. Which divine being, which divine consciousness is behind it all, driving all these, using all these as its means. So in the next time when we meet, we will look at this text next Sunday, the para which we just read rapidly, and see how it can be even a kind of a theme for introspection and meditation as we turn into ourselves and become aware that there is an I, there is an isness, the fact of something existing, a self which is other, firmer, vaster, of which these are means and processes. So the first verse, so the first verse ends with Ko Devo Yunakti. Who, which deity, which being, which presence, which consciousness does this? So by whom missioned falls the mind shot to its mark? By whom yoked moves the first breath forward on its paths? By whom impelled is this word that men speak. What God set eye and ear to their workings. You see how the whole chapter now was an elaboration of the single verse. And each of the nuances of the verse has been captured there. First, the role of the mind. Second, its dependence on life breath. And then life breath as a primary power missioned on its paths and the five paths which we elaborated upon today. And then from there, the word impelled, and then the sight and the hearing in their working, and the deities behind presiding over all these. Go Devo, which God, which being? We can meditate on this for a brief while.